The beeping of the hospital machines still echoes in my mind. 1 week. That's all the time I had with my beautiful baby boy, Isaac. His tiny fingers had wrapped around mine with such strength that I was certain he would grow up to be as resilient as his mother. I was wrong. Life had other plans. Cruel ones. I sat alone in the chapel of the funeral home, my black dress wrinkled from the sleepless nights spent by my son's hospital bed. The small white casket at the front seemed to mock every dream I'd ever had of motherhood. Through my tears, I kept checking my phone, hoping for a message, a call, anything from Richard. My husband should have been here an hour ago. The funeral director's sympathetic glances were becoming unbearable. "Mrs. Reynolds, should we—" he started, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "Just a few more minutes, please." My voice didn't sound like my own anymore. It was hoarse from crying, from screaming into pillows, from begging God for answers that never came. The minutes ticked by like hours. The few friends and family members who had come to support us shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My sister Sarah squeezed my hand and whispered, "Amber, we need to start." I nodded, feeling numb. That's when my phone finally buzzed. The message that appeared on my screen would forever change my life. "I never wanted this child. Don't try to reach me. I'm taking some time away." My hands trembled as I read those words over and over. The chapel started spinning, but something inside me hardened. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was rage, pure and unstoppable. I stood up, my legs somehow finding strength I didn't know I had left. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my home office, surrounded by the silence that seemed to scream at me. That's when the first email arrived. A mistakenly forwarded itinerary. Richard and his secretary, Melissa, were in the Maldives. First-class tickets, luxury resort, romantic dinners by the beach. The dates showed they'd left the day before the funeral. I stared at my computer screen, my mind racing through the past year. The late nights at the office, the business trips that seemed to multiply after I announced my pregnancy, the subtle changes in his behavior. It all made sense now, forming a picture so clear it felt like a physical blow. But what Richard didn't know, what he had forgotten in his arrogance, was that I wasn't just his wife. Before we married, I had been his company's most brilliant financial analyst. I had stepped back to focus on starting our family, a decision that now felt like a cruel joke. With shaking hands, I opened my laptop and logged into the company's system. My old credentials still worked. Richard had never thought to revoke them. As I began digging through files and financial records, a plan started forming in my mind. If he thought he could abandon our son and me without consequences, he was about to learn a devastating lesson. The sun was rising when I finally looked up from my screen. In front of me lay evidence of years of financial manipulation, cleverly hidden beneath layers of legitimate business. Richard had been siphoning money into personal accounts, preparing for something. Now I knew what, or rather who, he had been preparing for. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Janet, it's Amber Reynolds." "Yes, I know it's early. Listen, I need your help with something at the company. How quickly can you get the board together for an emergency meeting?" The pieces were set. While Richard was sipping cocktails on a beach with his mistress, I was about to remind him of something crucial. Never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. The Reynolds Group headquarters stood imposing against the morning sky, its glass facade reflecting the sunrise. I smoothed down my navy suit, the one I'd worn countless times during my analyst days, and walked through the revolving doors. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing with purpose. "Mrs. Reynolds?" The security guard's surprise was evident. "We weren't expecting you." "It's all right, Tom. The board is expecting me." I managed a small smile, remembering how he used to save me the best pastries from the lobby cafe when I worked late nights. The elevator ride to the executive floor gave me time to steady my nerves. In my bag was a file containing everything I'd discovered during my sleepless night. Fake accounts, suspicious transfers, and a pattern of deceit that made my stomach turn. But what hurt more than the financial betrayal was finding emails between Richard and Melissa dating back to before my pregnancy. "Amber?" Janet stood waiting by the boardroom doors, her face a mixture of concern and determination. She'd been my mentor when I first joined the company, and now, as head of legal, she was about to become my strongest ally. Are you absolutely sure about this? I touched the locket around my neck, the one containing a tiny curl of Isaac's hair. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 12 pairs of eyes watched me take my seat at the head of the table, Richard's seat. Most of them hadn't seen me since the baby shower 5 months ago, when I'd been glowing with hope and excitement. Now I was a different woman entirely. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, I began, my voice steady despite the thunder of my heart. I apologize for the early hour, but what I'm about to share couldn't wait. For the next hour, I laid out everything. The fraudulent accounts, the embezzled funds, the carefully orchestrated deception that Richard had built while I was focusing on our family. With each revelation, I could see the shock and anger growing on the board members' faces. But why now? Marcus, the eldest board member, asked. Why are you bringing this to us today? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what came next. Because yesterday was my son's funeral, and while I was burying our child, Richard was boarding a first-class flight to the Maldives with his secretary, using company funds to finance their getaway. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, chaos erupted. Questions flew from all directions, phones were pulled out, and urgent whispers filled the room. But I remained calm, centered in the eye of the storm I had just unleashed. There's more, I continued, pulling out another file. As many of you know, I was one of this company's top analysts before I stepped back. What you might not know is that I never fully relinquished my role. I've been monitoring our financials remotely, maintaining a silent watch over the company's health. And I've developed a comprehensive plan to not only recover the embezzled funds, but to strengthen our position in the market. Janet stood up, her legal pad covered in notes. I've reviewed Amber's findings and her proposed strategy. It's solid. More than solid, it's brilliant. And given the circumstances, I believe we have no choice but to act immediately. The vote was unanimous. By noon, Richard's access to all company accounts was frozen, and security was notified not to allow him entry to any company property. I was appointed interim CEO, pending a full investigation. As the board members filed out, each stopping to express their support or condolences, I remained seated, staring at my reflection in the polished table. The woman looking back at me wasn't just a grieving mother or a betrayed wife. She was a force to be reckoned with. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Flight's about to land. Why are my cards being declined? I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled up the draft of a press release Janet had prepared, announcing the leadership change at the Reynolds Group. My finger hovered over the approve button as another text came through. Amber, what the hell is going on? With a steady hand, I pressed approve. Then I turned off my phone and walked to the window, watching the city spread out below me. Somewhere out there, Richard was about to discover that his perfect escape plan had one fatal flaw. He had underestimated the woman he'd left behind. Richard burst into my office 3 days later, his tan a stark contrast to the fury on his face. He'd flown back immediately after his credit cards were declined and the news broke. I didn't look up from the quarterly reports I was reviewing, letting the silence stretch between us like a rubber band about to snap. What the hell do you think you're doing? His voice trembled with rage. The designer suit he wore still had creases from being hastily packed. I finally raised my eyes to meet his. I'm doing my job as CEO of this company. Your old chair is quite comfortable, by the way. My calm seemed to infuriate him even more. This is ridiculous. You can't just... Can't what, Richard? Can't protect the company from fraud? Can't expose financial misconduct? I stood slowly, placing both hands on the desk. Or can't function without your permission, because I've been doing all three quite successfully. He took a step forward, but I didn't flinch. The security button was under my desk, though I doubted I'd need it. Richard was many things, but physically violent wasn't one of them. His weapon of choice had always been emotional manipulation. You're grieving, Amber. You're not thinking clearly. Our son? Don't you dare. My voice cut through the air like a blade. Don't you dare mention Isaac. You lost that right when you chose a beach vacation over his funeral. For a moment, Something like shame flickered across his face, but it was quickly replaced by calculation. I recognized that look. He was searching for leverage, a weakness to exploit. "The board won't stand for this," he said, smoothing his tie. "They know me. I built this company. Actually, your father built this company. You just happened to inherit it." I picked up a folder from my desk. "And the board has already seen this. Every transaction, every hidden account, every penny you've been siphoning away. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" "You were supposed to be too devastated to notice," he muttered, then caught himself too late. The words hung in the air between us. In that moment, I saw him clearly for perhaps the first time in our marriage. A man so consumed by his own desires that he'd weaponized my grief, counting on my pain to blind me. "That was your first mistake," I said quietly. "Your second was forgetting who I was before I became Mrs. Reynolds. The analyst who caught the Henderson fraud? The one who restructured the Asian market division? That was me, Richard. I just let you take the credit because I thought that's what a supportive wife did." He sank into one of the visitor chairs, his arrogance crumbling. "What do you want? Money? Is this about revenge?" I walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. In the reflection, I could see Isaac's photo on my desk, the only one we'd managed to take in the hospital. His tiny face peaceful in sleep. "This isn't about revenge, Richard. It's about justice. For the company, for the shareholders you've been stealing from, and yes, for our son." I turned back to face him. "The DA's office has everything. They're very interested in speaking with you." The color drained from his face. "You wouldn't." "I already have. They're waiting in the lobby with Janet from legal." I pressed the intercom. "Send them up, please." As we waited for the elevator to arrive, Richard tried one last time. "Amber, please, we can work this out. Think about what this will do to both of us, to our reputation." I looked at him. This man I had loved, this father who had abandoned our child's funeral for a tropical tryst, and felt nothing but pity. Our reputation? I shook my head. "I'm not the one who left their child's funeral for a beach vacation with their secretary. The press is already having a field day with that story. Apparently, someone leaked your travel itinerary." The elevator dinged, and two suited figures stepped out, followed by Janet. As they approached, I saw the moment Richard realized there was no escape route, no clever solution, no way to charm his way out of this one. "Mr. Reynolds," one of the DA's officers said, "we need you to come with us." As they led him away, he looked back at me one last time. "I did love you, you know. In the beginning." "I know," I replied softly. "The problem is, Richard, you never loved anyone more than yourself." The elevator doors closed, and I was alone in the office that had once been his. Outside, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I touched the locket containing Isaac's curl and whispered, "I did it, baby boy. Mommy did it." But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a much longer journey, one of healing, rebuilding, and discovering who Amber Reynolds really was, beyond the roles of wife and mother that had defined her for so long. And for the first time since losing Isaac, I felt something that surprised me. Hope. The media circus that followed Richard's arrest was relentless. Every morning, new headlines screamed about the Reynolds scandal. Some painted me as the calculating wife who had orchestrated her husband's downfall. Others portrayed me as the grieving mother who found strength in the face of betrayal. Neither version felt entirely true. The truth lived in the quiet moments between board meetings and press conferences. It lived in the nursery I couldn't bring myself to dismantle, in the grief counseling sessions I attended twice a week, in the late nights at the office when memories threatened to overwhelm me. "The shareholders are getting nervous," Janet informed me one evening, dropping a stack of reports on my desk. "They're worried about stability." I nodded, unsurprised. "Set up a shareholders meeting for next week. It's time to show them our new direction." But before I could focus on that, I had to deal with another crisis. Melissa, Richard's former secretary and mistress, had gone to a tabloid with her story. The article painted a sympathetic picture of her as Richard's true love, claiming our marriage had been loveless for years before Isaac was conceived. I found her waiting outside my office one morning, her designer clothes a sharp contrast to her tear-stained face. "I didn't know about the funeral," she blurted out as soon as I approached. "He told me you were coping well, that you had family supporting you. I never would have—" "Stop." My voice was quiet, but firm. "You knew I was pregnant. You knew I was his wife. Everything else is just degrees of betrayal." She flinched. "He said he loved me. He said that to me too." I unlocked my office door. "The difference is, I'm not the one who helped him steal from his company and abandon his child's funeral. I can explain everything to the press," she offered desperately. "Tell them the truth about how he manipulated me too." I turned to face her, really looking at her for the first time. She was younger than I had imagined, probably fresh out of college when Richard had first noticed her. Another victim of his charm and manipulation, even if she'd been a willing participant. "Go home, Melissa. Find a good lawyer. The FBI will want to talk to you about those offshore accounts you helped set up." After she left, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. There was work to be done. The company's Asian division was struggling in the wake of the scandal, and our European partners were demanding reassurance. But first, I opened my personal email and found what I had been avoiding. A message from my mother. "Darling, I know you're trying to be strong, but you don't have to do this alone. Your father and I are worried. All this business with the company. Maybe it would be better to let someone else handle it while you heal." I closed the email without responding. They meant well, but they didn't understand. This wasn't just about running the company or exposing Richard's crimes. This was about finding myself again, about honoring Isaac's memory by becoming the strongest version of myself. The shareholders' meeting was scheduled for the following week. I spent days preparing, reviewing every aspect of our new business strategy. But the night before the meeting, I found myself driving to the cemetery. Isaac's grave was small, marked by a simple stone. I sat beside it, placing a fresh bouquet of white roses against the marble. "I wish you could see your mama now, little one," I whispered, tracing his name with my finger. "I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. I'm fighting. And tomorrow, I'm going to show everyone that what your father did doesn't define us." A soft rain began to fall, but I stayed, protected by my umbrella, talking to my son about everything and nothing. About the company's new charitable foundation I was planning to launch in his name. About the women's support group I had started attending. About the small victories and daily struggles. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the cemetery, I made a promise. Not just to Isaac, but to myself. This story wouldn't end with Richard's betrayal or even his eventual conviction. It would continue with my transformation, with every step I took toward healing, with every positive change I could create from this pain. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. "Ready for tomorrow." I took one last look at Isaac's grave, touching the stone gently. "I love you, baby boy," I whispered. Then I stood, straightened my shoulders, and typed my response. More than ready. Time to show them who Amber Reynolds really is. The shareholders filled the conference room, their murmurs echoing off the walls. I stood at the podium, my presentation ready, when Marcus, our eldest board member, rushed in looking pale. He was clutching a folder I'd never seen before. "Amber, we need to talk. Now." His voice shook. "It's about Richard's father." The revelation that followed shattered everything I thought I knew about the Reynolds empire. Old Henry Reynolds, Richard's seemingly upstanding father, had built the company on a foundation of fraud. The documentation Marcus discovered showed decades of systematic deception, with Richard merely continuing his father's legacy. The company's original funding, Marcus explained in the emergency board meeting, came from stolen pension funds. Henry Reynolds ruined hundreds of families to build this empire. The weight of this truth pressed against my chest. The company I was fighting to save was built on lies. But as I looked at the faces of our employees through the glass walls, people who depended on their jobs, who had families to support, I knew what I had to do. I returned to the shareholders' meeting, gripping the podium until my knuckles turned white. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we're not just presenting a new direction for Reynolds Group. We're announcing a complete transformation." For the next hour, I laid out my vision. The company would be renamed. We would create a restitution fund for the families Henry Reynolds had defrauded. Every dirty dollar would be traced and repaid, with interest. The corporate structure would be rebuilt from the ground up, with unprecedented transparency. "This will cost us billions," someone shouted from the back. "Yes," I agreed, "but our profits were built on stolen dreams. It's time to make it right." The vote that followed was close, but we won. As the room cleared, Janet touched my arm. "There's something else you should know. The police found evidence in Henry's old files. About Isaac." My heart stopped. "What about Isaac?" "Richard." Janet's voice cracked. "Richard falsified some of Isaac's medical records. He paid someone at the hospital to ensure—" She couldn't finish. The world tilted on its axis. I gripped the edge of the table, my legs threatening to give way. Richard hadn't just abandoned our son's funeral. He had played a part in his death, all to protect his inheritance, to prevent an innocent child from exposing the generations of fraud through a routine medical history. That night, I sat in Isaac's nursery for the first time since his death, surrounded by the stuffed animals we'd never get to share. Rage and grief battled inside me, but something else emerged too, a steely determination. I pulled out my phone and dialed the district attorney's number. "It's Amber Reynolds. I need to tell you about Henry Reynolds and my son Isaac, and I want Richard charged with murder." The recording of my call to the DA would later be played in court, marking the moment when one of the biggest financial scandals in history became something far more sinister. But that night, sitting in my son's nursery, I made a new promise. This wouldn't just be about saving a company anymore. It would be about justice. For Isaac, for all the families the Reynolds men had destroyed, and for every person who'd ever been betrayed by someone they trusted. The next morning, as I walked into the office, our company's name already being removed from the building, I felt Isaac's presence stronger than ever. My baby boy's short life would not be in vain. His death would spark a revolution of truth and accountability that would change countless lives. The sight of my empty inbox stopped me short. Every employee in the company had voluntarily copied me on evidence of past misconduct they'd witnessed. They were choosing truth, choosing justice, choosing to be part of the change. I touched the locket containing Isaac's curl and whispered, "Watch Mama work, little one. This is just the beginning." The homicide detective's office was smaller than I expected. Detective Sarah Gagnon sat across from me, her dark eyes sharp as she reviewed the medical records we'd uncovered. "The nurse who falsified the records has agreed to testify," she said, sliding a photo across the desk. "She claims Richard paid her to delay critical treatments for Isaac, making it look like natural complications." I stared at the photograph. The nurse I'd trusted with my son's care, smiling in her uniform. The betrayal cut deep, but I forced myself to focus. What about the attending physician? He was unaware. The nurse intercepted his orders, altered documentation. But here's where it gets interesting. Detective Gagnon pulled out another file. We found similar patterns at other hospitals where Reynolds executives had family members treated, going back decades. My stomach churned. Henry Reynolds made this standard practice. When certain family members became inconvenient, she hesitated. "Amber, there's more. We found evidence that Richard's first wife didn't die of natural causes either." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Richard had been married before, briefly, to a woman named Caroline. She'd died before I met him, supposedly from a congenital heart condition. He killed her too? My voice sounded distant, strange. "We're exhuming her body. But yes, we believe so. She'd discovered some discrepancies in the company's books, just like you did." I left the police station in a daze, my mind racing with implications. Back at the office, Janet was waiting with news of her own. "The restitution fund is set up," she reported. "But we've hit a snag. Some of the original families Henry Reynolds defrauded. They're willing to talk about other deaths." A pattern emerged over the next weeks. The Reynolds men hadn't just stolen money. They'd eliminated threats to their empire with frightening efficiency. Each death had seemed natural, tragic, but unremarkable. Until now. The investigation consumed me. By day, I worked to transform the company, to make it a force for good. By night, I pored over old records, connecting dots that had been hidden for generations. Then came the letter. It arrived at my office, handwritten on prison stationery. Richard's familiar scrawl filled the page. Amber, you were never supposed to find out. About Isaac, about any of it. It was meant to be clean, simple. A tragic loss that would keep you distracted while I handled the transition, just like with Caroline. But you surprised me. You always did. I know you'll read this and think I'm a monster. Maybe I am. But I was just protecting the legacy, doing what my father taught me, what his father taught him. They'll find more bodies, Amber. More stories. The truth is uglier than you can imagine. I'm sorry about Isaac. Not because it was wrong, but because it hurt you. You were the only one I ever really loved. Richard. I handed the letter to Detective Gagnon, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. He just confessed to multiple murders. She nodded grimly. This breaks the case wide open. With this and the nurse's testimony, the trial that followed would later be called the case of the century. Not just for the financial fraud, but for exposing generations of calculated murders disguised as medical tragedies. I testified for days, detailing everything. The financial discoveries, the medical records, the pattern of deaths. In the gallery, I could feel Richard's eyes on me, but I never looked his way. Instead, I focused on the small photo of Isaac I kept with me, my beautiful boy who had died because he'd been born into the wrong family. The company's transformation continued amid the legal storms. We established a foundation for investigating medical fraud. Every hospital where the Reynolds family had influenced care was audited. Families received not just restitution, but the truth about their loved ones' deaths. One evening, after another long day of testimony, I found myself at Isaac's grave. The stone had been updated with a new inscription. Beloved son, whose life sparked a revolution of truth. My phone buzzed. Detective Gagnon. Amber, the jury's reaching a decision. Tomorrow morning. I touched the cool marble of Isaac's headstone. We did it, baby boy. The truth is finally coming out. All of it. As I stood to leave, I noticed a woman watching me from a few rows away. She looked familiar somehow. When she approached, I understood why. I'm Caroline's sister, she said softly. I always knew Richard killed her. Thank you for bringing it all to light. We stood together in the fading light, two women connected by the brutal legacy of the Reynolds men. But tomorrow would bring justice. Tomorrow would bring change. The courtroom fell silent as the jury foreman stood. I gripped Caroline's sister Amy's hand, both of us holding our breath. In the matter of the state versus Richard Reynolds, on the count of first-degree murder of Isaac Reynolds, we find the defendant guilty. The verdict continued. Guilty on all counts. Murder, fraud, conspiracy. The dynasty of death that the Reynolds men had built was finally crumbling. Richard stood emotionless as the judge delivered his sentence. Life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Only when they led him away did he finally look at me, his face a mask of defeat and something else. Recognition. He'd finally understood that the woman he'd underestimated had become his undoing. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, their questions blending into white noise. I stepped to the microphones, Amy by my side. Today isn't about victory, I began. It's about truth. About justice for Isaac, for Caroline, and for countless others whose lives were stolen by the Reynolds family's greed. But our work isn't finished. Back at the office, now renamed Veritas Corp., I called an emergency board meeting. The company's transformation wasn't complete yet. We had one final step to take. We're going public, I announced, but not in the traditional sense. We're converting to a benefit corporation. 50% of our profits will go to the victims' families and to preventing medical fraud. The other 50% will fund research into preventing infant mortality. Janet raised an eyebrow. The shareholders won't like that. They'll have a choice, I replied. Stay and be part of something meaningful, or sell their shares, which we'll buy back at premium and redistribute to the employees. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor in my office. Richard's mother, Eleanor Reynolds. She stood in the doorway, aged beyond her years by the scandal. I knew, she said simply. About all of it. Henry told me it was for the family's good. I convinced myself to believe him. She placed a thick folder on my desk. These are all the names. Everyone they hurt. Everyone they killed. I've carried this burden for 40 years. I stared at the folder, then at this broken woman who had chosen silence over justice for decades. Why now? Because you did what I never could. You chose truth over family loyalty. You chose justice over power. She turned to leave, then paused. Isaac would be proud of his mother. The next few months were a whirlwind of change. Veritas Corp's transformation made headlines worldwide. Other companies began adopting our transparency policies. The foundation we established helped expose similar medical fraud schemes across the country. 1 year to the day after Isaac's death, I stood in my office, my real office, not Richard's old one, looking out over the city. The company had emerged stronger, cleaner, purpose-driven. The restitution fund had helped hundreds of families. Our medical fraud prevention program had already saved lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Gagnon. Another Reynolds victim's family found. They want to meet you. I touched the locket containing Isaac's curl, then replied, "Send them up." A young woman entered my office minutes later, clutching a photo of her father. As she shared her story, I realized something profound. Every person who came forward, every truth revealed, every life saved was part of Isaac's legacy. My son had lived for only a week, but his impact would last generations. That evening, I visited Isaac's grave with fresh flowers. Amy joined me as she often did now. We'd formed a strange but powerful bond, two women united by loss and purpose. Veritas Corp's medical safety initiative saved its first baby today, I told Isaac's headstone. A little girl in Chicago. Her mother named her Hope. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the cemetery, I felt a deep sense of peace. The Reynolds men had built their empire on death and deceit, but from its ashes we'd created something life-affirming, something true. "Rest easy, my sweet boy," I whispered. "Mama's not done yet. This is just the beginning of your legacy." 18 months after Richard's conviction, I finally decided to pack up Isaac's nursery. Each item I touched held a memory. The stuffed elephant he never got to cuddle, the books we never read together, the tiny clothes still with their tags attached. My therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez had helped me reach this point. "Healing doesn't mean forgetting," she'd said. "It means finding a way to carry the love without being crushed by the loss." As I carefully folded the last onesie, my phone rang. It was Detective Gagnon. "Amber, we found something in Richard's father's old lake house. You need to see this." The lake house was a Victorian mansion I'd visited only once during my marriage. In the basement, behind a false wall, Gagnon's team had discovered a room full of files, decades of the Reynolds family's secrets. "These go back 3 generations, Gagnon explained, showing me ledgers, photographs, and medical records. It wasn't just Richard and his father. His grandfather started it all. Among the files was a journal belonging to Richard's grandfather, Theodore Reynolds. His entries detailed a calculated system of eliminating problematic family members who threatened the company's secrets. The pattern was always the same: manipulated medical records, bought hospital staff, deaths that appeared natural. "There's something else," Gagnon said softly, handling me a yellowed envelope. Inside was a letter from Richard's mother, Eleanor, written 20 years ago. She'd threatened to expose everything after discovering her own sister had been one of their victims. The next entry in Theodore's journal detailed Eleanor's accident and subsequent commitment to a private mental hospital. "She's still alive," Gagnon revealed. "The hospital is owned by a Reynolds shell company. She's been held there against her will all these years." The revelation shook me to my core. Eleanor's recent confession, her knowledge of the victims, it all made sense now. She hadn't been a willing participant. She'd been another victim. Within hours, I was on a private plane to Switzerland, where the hospital was located. Janet handled the legal proceedings while I focused on Eleanor's rescue. When I finally properly saw her, I recognized the same haunted look I'd seen in my own mirror so many times. "I knew you'd find me eventually," she said, her voice stronger than I expected. "When you exposed Richard, I started hoping, but they've kept me drugged. compliant. Until today. Back in the States, Eleanor's testimony added new charges to the case. Richard, already serving life, faced additional consequences. More importantly, we discovered other patients in similar facilities worldwide. Family members who'd been silenced over the years. Veritas Corp's mission expanded. We established a support network for survivors of medical abuse and family betrayal. Eleanor, once she recovered her strength, became its most passionate advocate. One evening, as we worked late at the office, Eleanor shared something that changed everything again. "There's one more thing you need to know, Amber, about Isaac." She pulled out an old photo. Richard has a twin brother, a brother who disappeared 30 years ago after threatening to expose the family's crimes. His wife was pregnant when he vanished. I stared at the photo, my heart racing. "Are you saying Isaac's medical complications weren't just about silencing you? They were about eliminating any trace of the Reynolds bloodline that wasn't under their control. They feared the truth would come out through genetic testing if he lived." The weight of this revelation was staggering. Somewhere out there, Richard's brother might still be alive. He might have children, grandchildren even, innocent people who could be in danger simply because of their DNA. That night, I stood in what had been Isaac's nursery, now converted into a home office. The walls were covered with photos, not just of Isaac, but of all the Reynolds family victims we'd discovered. In the center was a new organization chart for Veritas Corp's latest initiative, Project Legacy. "We're not done yet, baby boy," I whispered, touching the locket around my neck. "There are more truths to uncover, more lives to save. And somewhere out there, you might have family who needs our protection." My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Gagnon. "Found a lead on the brother. Want to hear it?" I looked at the moon shining through the window, thinking of all the secrets still buried, all the lives still hanging in the balance. "Yes," I replied. "It's time to uncover the whole truth." The small cafe in Montreal was exactly where Detective Gagnon's lead had pointed us. I watched through the window as a man in his 60s, the spitting image of Richard's father, wiped down tables after closing time. "That's him," Eleanor whispered. "That's Thomas." Richard's twin brother had built a quiet life here, working as a cafe owner under the name Thomas Laurent. When we entered, his face showed no surprise, only resignation. "I wondered when someone would find me," he said, pulling out chairs for us. "I saw the news about Richard, about the company. I knew it was only a matter of time." Over the next few hours, Thomas shared his story. He'd discovered the family's crimes while working as a junior executive in the company. When he'd threatened to expose everything, his father gave him a choice: disappear or face the same fate as their other, problematic relatives. "My wife was 7 months pregnant," he said, his voice breaking. "I couldn't risk their lives. So I ran, created new identities. But I lost them anyway. She died in childbirth, and our daughter with her. The parallel with Isaac hit me hard. More innocent lives lost to the Reynolds legacy." "But that's not the end of the story," Thomas continued, pulling out a photo. "My daughter had a daughter of her own before she died. She's 17 now, living with her father in Vancouver. I've watched over them from afar all these years, making sure the family never found them." "My granddaughter," Eleanor breathed, touching the photo with trembling fingers. Within weeks, we had relocated Thomas's granddaughter Sophie and her father to a safe location. DNA tests confirmed everything. Veritas Corp's resources were deployed to ensure their protection and bring them into our growing network of survivors and allies. 1 year later, I stood at the podium during Veritas Corp's annual shareholders meeting. The company had exceeded all expectations, our ethical business model becoming a template for corporate reform worldwide. "Today, we're announcing the Sophie Isaac Initiative," I declared, watching Thomas's granddaughter beam from the front row. Named after both our lost children, the program would provide support and protection for victims of medical fraud and corporate abuse worldwide. Eleanor, now serving as our Survivors Advocacy Director, had tears in her eyes. The woman who had been silenced for decades was finally using her voice to help others. Later that evening, I visited Isaac's grave one last time before a long business trip. The cemetery was peaceful in the twilight. "We found them, baby boy," I whispered, placing fresh flowers by his headstone. "We found your family, and we're making sure no one can hurt them, or anyone else, ever again." My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Grandma Eleanor told me more stories about Uncle Isaac today. Wish I could have known him. Thank you for finding us, Aunt Amber." I touched the locket containing Isaac's curl, smiling through tears. My son's life had been brutally short, but his legacy had become something beautiful, a force for truth, justice, and healing that would continue long after I was gone. As I walked back to my car, I saw a young mother with a baby, visiting a nearby grave. Without hesitation, I pulled out a business card with the Veritas Corp crisis hotline number. "If you ever need help," I said softly, "we're here." She took the card, and I saw in her eyes the same mix of grief and determination I'd felt 2 years ago. Another life that could be saved. Another story that could be changed. The sun set over the cemetery as I drove away, casting long shadows that reminded me of how far I'd come from that devastating day at Isaac's funeral. Richard's betrayal had shattered my world, but from those fragments, I'd built something stronger. A legacy of truth, justice, and protection for those who needed it most. "Watch over us, little one," I whispered to the evening sky. "Your story isn't over. It's just beginning."